Welcome to this month's Salute to Service, and today I have Medina resident David Bilinovich. How you doing, Dave?
Good, Ed.
Good to see you. So you're originally not really from Medina, but from right around here anyway, northeastern Ohio, right?
I was born in Lakewood, raised in, went to high school in Parma, joined the Marine Corps, was gone a long time, came back and moved to Medina.
So we got a lot in common. I was born in Lakewood and raised in Parma, and now I'm in Medina too. That's kind of odd.
Deja vu.
So you got out of high school in the late 70s or so, right?
I graduated in 1975.
So and went right into the Marine Corps after high school?
Yeah, I was a delayed entry program in high school. I was the oldest child of three brothers and or two brothers and a sister, and my mom was divorced. She's a Cleveland police officer, so my mom was willing to pay for college, but it would have killed her. So I joined the Marine Corps to get the GI Bill benefits.
So when you did the delayed entry, did you go to basic before your senior year or after you got out of high school altogether?
I went right after high school because
Okay.
I signed up in January of '75, and in June of '75, I had orders to Parris Island.
Why the Marine Corps?
My dad was a Marine, all my uncles were Marines. It was kind of a family thing.
1975, I mean, we're talking, what, 3 years after the Vietnam War and stuff. A lot of Vietnam vets still in the Marine Corps at that point, I assume?
Actually, when I was in boot camp, the Miigwes was going on, and they were all telling us we're going to go back to Vietnam and win that damn war.
Really?
My first assignment in the Marine Corps after graduating Parris Island in South Carolina, the Marine Corps flew me to Camp Pendleton, which is in California, for infantry training school. While waiting to get enough students to have the class, we were assigned to clean up the Quonset huts that they had the Vietnamese refugees were living in because of
they came with the boat people or whatever?
came over on the, when they evacuated Saigon.
Right.
So we were burning mattresses and sanitizing Quonset huts. And
So, I mean, from the training standpoint, with a bunch of guys that are training you that had probably been in Vietnam at some point, was there, was there a big emphasis on the training and stuff like that?
there was a lot of emphasis on the basic combat skills. You have to remember they were downsizing the military then. I had a lot of staff, non-commissioned officers that had served as company commanders in combat because they were battlefield promoted, and then when the drawdown came, they either reverted them back to a staff sergeant or a gunnery sergeant or to a warrant officer. So it was a tough time for the Marine Corps. Plus, it was a time where we had a lot of the McNamara 100,000 with the Category 4 mental categories where they were good enough to be drafted, and all the services,
But not retained, right?
all the services had to keep them. The Marine Corps was a little friendlier in that if you served honorably, and I remember we had a lot of staff sergeants and gunnery sergeants, E7s, that were wounded in Vietnam, had done their tours, and the Marine Corps said we owed them, and they were going to keep them to 20 years. Not 20 years in one day, but there was some sense of loyalty there that they had served the Marine Corps, served the country. They weren't going to just throw them out the door if they could avoid it. The officers, on the other hand, they were a little more, I guess they felt they were better educated and had more marketable job skills. They were pretty tough on if they didn't meet the selection board criteria. The Marine Corps was shedding a lot of officers at the time.
So now you retired from the
I retired from the Marine Corps.
What year?
In June of 1999.
So I know there was a big change. You had the downsize, like you said, of the military in the late 70s, and probably going into the 80s was the rift. And then Reagan started the big build-up in the mid to late 80s, kind of towards, it was his second term. And we went on through the 90s and obviously the first Persian Gulf War. What was the change you saw in the Marine Corps from the time you went in that kind of like 10-year period to the buildup of, and then going to the Persian Gulf War and then obviously the 90s?
The biggest thing I saw was, I remember a couple of years where we were worried about the fiscal year budget under the Carter administration. We weren't getting paid, and the Navy Relief was offering people who had families diapers and formula for our children.
Wow.
And then, I'm not political, but then the Reagan administration came in and gave us an 18% pay raise, said to make up for the time. The Marine Corps stayed rather small, and they were rather particular about who they were selecting. So we came from where if you were breathing, you could go in the service to, it was hard to get in the Marine Corps, very hard. And so it was kind of a unique challenge because they were smarter, they were brighter, they were young, they were motivated. They came in for a different reason than the people who were drafted or were volunteering in lieu of the draft. It was an interesting time. There were a lot of assignments available. The push was obviously the Cold War. Everything was geared towards NATO. There were still some assignments, and the Marine Corps was still involved in the Pacific, particularly concerned with Korea. But more and more we were looking at counterinsurgency ops in South America because El Salvador and that was going on then, Honduras, Colombia. We ran a lot of counter-narcotic operations because that was the only real threat other than World War III with the Russians.
With the Russians, the Soviets.
Right, Soviets.
Any, did you ever do any embassy guard duty?
I was on, although I'm infantry by MOS in the Marine Corps, because like I said, it's a little smaller, we don't have the luxury of being able to have.
I thought everybody was infantry in the Marine Corps.
Everybody's infantry in the Marine Corps, but that was my actual MOS. I was on sea duty. I spent 2 years on an aircraft carrier. We were assigned to guard particular weapons that were on the aircraft carrier at the time. The Marine Corps downsized and did away with the sea duty and let the Navy handle that responsibility. I had some base assignments. I was on embassy duty. I served in Rangoon, Burma. When I got my brief at the State Department, they said, set your watch back 50 years, nothing ever happens there. And 2 months into it, I was evacuating my wife and son. The country was having a revolution for democracy with Aung San Suu Kyi. The military junta decided they were going to crush the democracy. I was in charge of the Marine Security Guard there. They actually decided they were going to teach the Americans a lesson by shooting into the embassy. The host country is responsible for protecting your embassy. So 5 Marines that aren't going to do anything other than,
Your speed bump, yeah.
Right, we're going to die in place.
Yeah.
But I had to evacuate the family. A small core of us stayed. The military with the Defense Intelligence Agency stayed. Obviously, the ambassador stayed. All our families went home. The CIA stayed. Essential State Department people, and our plan was that if worst came to worst, we'd burn down the embassy so that they wouldn't get taken.
They wouldn't take it.
They wouldn't take it, but it affected the American Library. It affected all our mission work, Agency for International Development. The American government does a lot of good work overseas that a lot of times we don't see.
A lot of third world countries.
Right, it's listed under 4A, but when you're dealing with a military dictatorship, I remember we gave them Hueys to fight the drug product over there, and they charged us tax for landing the Hueys that we were giving them. I just thought that was incredible. That was interesting, but so we got through that tour, and the Marine Corps wanted to make it up to my wife and son, so they said, where would you like to go? I was thinking maybe South Africa or something like that. My wife said she wanted to go to Europe. So they sent us to Munich, was then West Germany, as a payback tour. So we served a little less than 2 years in Munich, probably one of the better assignments I've ever had.
What years were you in Munich?
I was there in 1989, 90.
So we were there pretty much together. I was a little farther north. I was up towards Würzburg. But it was a good time to be in Europe, though. So you were there when the wall came down and all that, pretty much?
Yes, I was there as the wall was coming down. I remember seeing the CIA reports on, they had misestimated how long it would take the Germans to revolt on the eastern side and how weak the Russian government was. You probably remember the, up by the Brandenburg Gate, we took a tour up there when Berlin was opened up. I had a Russian colonel trying to sell me his uniform or his AK-47 and all that for blue jeans and Coca-Cola and dollar bills.
Yeah, they were giving stuff away up there.
It was an incredible time. Of course, Munich has Oktoberfest. I didn't know I had as many friends in the Marine Corps as I did. Everybody and their brother wanted to stay at the Marine House, crash on the floor, whatever, just like go to Oktoberfest. And you can travel by train anywhere in Europe, so it's great. I had more friends than I knew what to do with, and I drank more beer than I probably should have.
Munich was a really nice city. It was kind of a strange period when the wall came down. You had all the, it was a trickle effect. Obviously, it happened in Berlin, but then when the whole country opened up, I remember for a couple months it was just the little Trabis, I think they were, the East German Trabis, and they had everything tied on top of their car. It looked like it would tip over, and they were driving them as far as the gas tank would go, and then they would just get out and walk and leave them. So they had all these little cars parked all over. And of course, they didn't do but 30 miles an hour on Autobahn. That was a problem.
Well, we went to Czechoslovakia because they'd loosened the restriction on American military. So we took a train ride to Czechoslovakia, and it was interesting because I drove by an East German and Czech Army range that had silhouettes of American tanks and American aircraft on it that they were shooting at, something that we could relate to when we were always shooting at silhouettes of their things.
That's funny.
We stood in line, my wife stood in line at this crystals, because the Army was making a killing on driving over and buying crystal from the Czech
Yeah, the Bavarian, was it Bohemian Crystal?
Bohemian
Yeah,
Crystal,
yeah.
and my wife got in line at one store, and they had some glasses on display, and she said, "I'll take a set of those." After staying in line for a half hour, the lady goes, "No, those are all we have left."
Oh, wow.
But people would stand in line for toilet tissue and meat over there. It was kind of interesting to see the communist utopia unraveled. Now, I'm sure it's much different, much modern then, but I will tell you that sitting at the consulate in Munich and getting the briefs from where our embassy was in Bonn then was that they were concerned, West Germany was concerned, how are they going to absorb the debt of East Germans and what kind of problems they're going to have, because it's night and day.
Because the East German mark was like 20 to 1 or 14 to 1 at that. I mean, it was still very, very high. And the West German mark was only about maybe 2 to 1 for the dollar.
Right.
So they absorbed, after a time, they absorbed that whole, debt of the East German, and their money became equal. So, I mean,
it was an incredible economic time there. It was a good time to be there because you could get some good deals.
Yeah.
It was a rough time, but Germany made it work. It was interesting because a lot of people, when the wall came down, tried to defect. I remember getting a couple Soviet defectors into our consulate in the middle of the night, just trying. One we almost shot because he climbed over the gate to get in. He saw the American flag.
Wow.
And so we had to call McGraw-Kaserne, which was the Army MI battalion, and they would come over and give you the usual crap about how you didn't see anything.
Where'd you go and check? Prague?
I went to Prague and Pilsen. Pilsen is kind of like Cleveland. It's their industrial city.
Yeah.
And it's Pilsner Unikrell, the beer. That's where it's made. So we went and looked at the brewery. Actually, Pilsen was the farthest east the U.S. Army had advanced in the war, and then were ordered to pull back because the Soviets took over that area.
Right.
And a lot of the people still remember the American Army, the older people, and they were coming out and thanking us. And they actually had a bunch of old souvenirs that they'd hit under penalty of death: helmets, rifles, flags, and that.
When we were in Bosnia, they had found caches of stuff that we had airdropped in Yugoslavia to fight the Soviets after World War II. I don't know, who. I mean, obviously we were responsible for dropping it, but it was all U.S. military stuff, and it was age
going
stuff.
to Tito.
Yeah, I mean, because they, I guess at that point they thought maybe they'd raise up against the Soviets or something at the end of World War II. That's kind of funny.
It was definitely interesting. And then I went to 3rd Battalion, 7th Marines at 29 Palms, California. You know where that's at.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to be there.
It made Fort Irwin look good, though.
It did. 29 Palms is one of the places that, when you go there, you're glad you joined the Army.
29 Palms has 29 palms, and the rest is just sand and sun.
There's a huge road. I mean, that was the odd thing the first time I went to 29 Palms is there's like this, I don't know, was it 4-lane or 6-lane road that leads into 29 Palms? And I remember I asked somebody, because there's no traffic out there.
No.
It's just a huge double-lane road. And they said, well, that was made for, I guess, maybe during the Cold War, so you guys could get to was it Camp Pendleton out there, quickly and load up. So there was this huge road coming out of 29 Palms going west.
Right.
Yeah.
So you had to be able to airlift a lot of our assets,
Right.
just like the Army, or sea lift it, but you had to get out of the desert. The good thing about the desert was, other than the desert tortoise, which was an ecological nightmare.
I remember that out there, yeah.
You could shoot anything, blow up anything, have airstrikes, all kinds of air on target. So, it was good training for Kuwait and on, because it was all live fire.
Right.
And it makes a big difference calling in and seeing how the different services bring their air packages in, and how you fire your SEAD missions and that. So it was a very good time. Then we went to Kuwait. Wasn't as long a war as everybody thought it would be.
Yeah, the 100 days.
The 100-hour war. I had a first sergeant stand in front of my battalion when we got back and say, all you heroes out there, I just want you to know that 100-hour war was shorter than some of the firefights I was in Vietnam.
That's funny.
So that was interesting.
So you went from 29 Palms over to the desert over in Kuwait?
Yes. And then I didn't like the assignment at 29 Palms, but it kind of prepares you for a lot of things.
We did a lot of, I was at Irwin in the late 90s, and I mean, obviously, nobody expected 9/11, but, obviously somebody expected us to go back to the Middle East, and we were doing a lot of training there. And actually, a lot of the Marines would come down from 29 Palms because, we were, by that time, we were doing a lot of joint operations and stuff like that. So, yeah, the desert is, it's a beautiful place at night, but not so nice during the day, I guess. I mean,
well, I went to Fort Irwin for, they have an MI outfit out there, and they have interesting things. They have inflatable or styrofoam tanks, T-72 tanks on it, and we went for the Foreign Weapons course They had all the Soviet and Chinese weapons and handmade weapons. Even had some British Sten guns, and
Really?
they had all the rounds. And they said, "You Marines like to shoot? Here's some
Take 'em out
ammo.
and shoot 'em.
Here's a quick class on the weapon. Don't hurt yourself and go shoot." So I enjoyed the hell out of that.
Wow. We had Chinese Dishkas when I was in Afghanistan because we didn't have enough, 240 Bravos or
Right.
the M60s. So we commandeered some Chinese Dishkas, and whatever ammo we would find, we'd keep and use it, because it's a automatic rifle and it's pretty good for a tower.
And it's reliable in that environment.
Yeah.
I would say that after that, it was just the Marine Corps' payback to me was to give me another instructor tour in Coronado, California, and that's where I retired.
Oh, that's a nice place.
Yeah, that's where the SEALs train. That's where we have our amphibious training for units that are deploying to the Pacific. And I had a pretty decent instructor job there. And then I had orders that my wife was not happy about back to 29 Palms. And I was coming into zone for E9, but my wife said, "Look, I've gone with you everywhere. I've done everything.
I'm done.
I'm done."
Yeah.
So I decided that I'd retire in San Diego rather than go back to the fleet.
So you retired, and you got a kind of an interesting history after you retired. So you joined up with Disabled American Veterans once you retired.
I went to college. I joined the DAV to do my claim because I was going to have the Marine Corps League do it, but a gunny who'd retired in front of me said, "Just go over to DAV, let them do your
Right.
claim. You can join the Marine Corps League," which I did as a fraternal group, but he said, "Let the DAV handle your claim." Didn't think anything about it. They did a good job with my claim. I went to college in California because it was cheaper than in Ohio.
Mm-hmm.
Got my associate in computer information systems and then a bachelor's in organizational behavior. Why Johnny doesn't play well with Mary. And then my wife said, San Diego's a lovely town, but our family's all in Ohio. So
Yeah.
like Sam, when we came home to die, I got a job with the VA at Brecksville when I had applied online at the government job site.
Mm-hmm.
And the girl who was hiring for the VA at Brecksville at the time, one of the things I put on my resume is that I was on the honor roll at Valley Forge High School in Parma Heights, and she had went to Valley Forge the year after me.
Wow.
So she recognized my name and said, "If you can get back to Ohio, we're not going to pay the way, but if you can get back, I'll give you the job." It was a
Right.
GS5 job, but I'd saved my move in the military. If you retire, if you can save your PCS move
Yeah, you get to use
if you
it.
go
Yeah.
to school.
Right.
So I had saved my move while I was going to school.
So they paid for you to
And
come back.
the Marine Corps paid for me to come home, and I took the job at Brecksville. And while I was working at Brecksville, I worked for the training organization for the VA. We made all the slides and the brochures that you see in the hospitals for the doctors and some of the software the doctors and nurses use. And my voc rehab counselor called me up one day and said, "You're a GS5. Go ask your boss if there's any possibility you can be a GS7 or GS9 soon." So I went in to see my boss, and he goes, "Dave, I like you. If I had a slot, I'd give it to you, but I don't have anything, and I don't know when I'm going to have anything."
Right.
So the voc rehab counselor sent me down to the Cleveland Federal Building and said, "I've got an interview for you with the DAV." I said, "Okay, fine. I'm a DAV member. I'll go down and hear what they have to say." And the supervisor and the assistant supervisor, both former Marines, said, "We think you're what we're looking for. We're going to make you a service officer." So I left the comfort of the VA and a government payday
The black hole, as they call it.
to, like I said, we did the training aid, so we really didn't have we didn't deal with patients, we didn't deal with the politics, we just made training. We
Right.
got an order in from Washington, and we made sure it got out to the field.
So as a service officer, though, you went back to San Diego now, too, didn't you?
I went on assignments all over the place. I was home based in Cleveland, but because of turnover at different places for usually not for good reasons, I was on assignment to multiple
somewhere else.
places. To mainly, I have, for some reason, I have a career history of being the cleanup guy. Even in the Marine Corps, if I went to a good unit, they gave me the bad company, or
Right.
the bad platoon, or the bad whatever.
Right.
So they always said, "You're here, make it better." So that was my whole life.
You're the
make it
go-to
better.
guy, man. I mean,
Yeah, I was the go-to guy, and I got used to it. And challenges don't bother me. Hard work doesn't bother me.
So you eventually you came back to Cleveland, and you wound up being the director for the DAV office downtown where you retired out of.
Yes, I retired because I worked my way up to the assistant supervisor, and then my boss wanted to go back to Waco, Texas. And his wife was a VA employee, and she got a transfer from
Right.
the VA back to Waco, Texas. So he said, "Dave, I'm leaving. I'm giving headquarters a 30-day notice that I'm retiring. He said, I'll recommend you. And I can't blame him because I left San Diego to come back to
Right.
Cleveland for family. So it was fortunate that I got selected. Along the way, I had some health issues, and the doctor said, if you can afford to retire, stress is probably going to kill you. If you can afford to retire now and enjoy. You've already done your share. And so I had to put in my papers with the DAV and step down. So I'm still on the fraternal side, but I'm no longer on the professional side.
But, you know, and I know, you know, our office works with your office, or the office you worked in very closely, and you did a great job as far as, you know, creating an atmosphere between county veteran service officers, the VA, the Ohio State Department of Veteran Services, and the DAV, and the other organizations too, as far as like a Team Ohio concept. And I know that that's carried on today, and we thank you for it. I mean, it's one thing we try to work with all our partners. But let's talk a little bit about the fraternal side, because that's really what you're doing right now. You are the Junior Vice Commander for the State of Ohio Department of Disabled American Veterans?
Yes, I stayed on the fraternal side. I was the chapter commander in Medina, the chapter.
Right.
They asked me on the state side, with all your experience on our professional side, can you come over and help us? So I became a line officer over there. And the good thing about management skills and leadership skills and the time management skills we learn in the military is you can apply that to anywhere you go.
So I'm going to ask you, what does the DAV do to help its disabled veterans? Give me the number one thing, and then number two is because we're always trying to get veterans to join our organizations. What or why do you think a veteran should join the DAV?
All these service organizations are fine. They all have their niche. DAVs is service, and I would say that, and coming from the professional side, I would say that services are first and foremost. I don't care about
When you talk about service, you were talking about claims processing.
claims processing, helping, whatever it could be. However you can serve a veteran, his or her family, or their surviving spouse. That's what we're interested in. So we have a little bit different niche and a little bit more restrictions on what we can and cannot do with our money. I would say that the reason that you should join the DAV is that you can join multiple veterans organizations, and I'm a member of a couple. But usually you only focus on one or two that you're really interested in. Because of my background, I'm obviously interested in the DAV. I like all the other service organizations. Like you said, it's Team Ohio.
Right.
The county wants to do well by the veteran. The VA wants to do well by the veteran. The DAV, the VFW, the American Legion, everybody wants to do well by the veteran.
Right.
So it's not like if I get a piece of the pie, you don't get a piece of the pie. We're all trying to make the pie
It's
better.
about the veteran. It's not about us.
Right. It's about the veteran. I would say joining it gives you an opportunity to serve in your local community, and it gives you an opportunity to check on how the VA is doing and how the changes in the law affect either their claim or their friend's claims. Or, you know, they can help out by learning more. If you don't join a fraternal organization, you may be well-read, you may understand the law, you may be an attorney and practice administrative law, but administrative law is different than a lot of other laws. And unless you really focus on the combined federal regulations and the VA laws and the public laws that are particular to veterans' needs, you're going to miss out on information that either valuable to you, your family, or your friends.
And they do change, because what you may be eligible for today, you may not have been eligible for 10 years ago or 5 years ago. So someone may have told you no 5 years ago, and today you may be eligible for it.
Right, and NEMR is a classic example where they went back and said, although Vietnam was 50 years ago, we now have enough data to say that previously we may have denied these disabilities. Now we're going to grant them. Camp Lejeune water claim is another one. They found out they're dumping all those toxins in the ground.
That's a mess down
in the ground. In the South, they use a lot of well water. Where did those toxins go? They went right back into your drinking water, your showering water, you know, whatever you made baby formula with. So it's a mess. They're looking at burn pit now for Iraq and Afghanistan, because a lot of times
the data coming out of there,
we didn't want to leave anything for the enemy to have, and we didn't want to ship it back, or it was used. So what's the easiest thing to do? Get a couple privates, some gasoline or diesel fuel, burn it and bury it.
I remember the burn pit in Kandahar, man. It was a huge hole, and everybody went out. It was funny because if you didn't have nothing to do, that's where you kind of went out there to see if there was any junk that you could use, because there was tons of stuff in there. I mean, you know, Humvee door. You know, if you got a Humvee and you didn't use the doors on it, you'd throw it in there. Well, somebody else may want the door. I mean, it was amazing the stuff that got burned in there. batteries, plastic, I mean, everything.
Things you wouldn't be allowed to do here.
No, not at all. Yeah, it's kind of amazing. And that smoke's blowing over where you're sleeping, and some guys actually worked out there, and I mean, you usually had a couple engineers or something that managed the pit,
I would say our big concern right now is that 1 million veterans are going to be downsized in the next year or two.
Right.
They're going to be back in the job market, some of them with multiple tours overseas. Regardless, they're going to be thrown back into the local community who's already hurting economically.
Right.
The recovery has not been as quick as everybody would like to see, so we're going to have 1 million more young Americans, men and women who did their service, are going to come back to the community and going to need help either with job placement, medical benefits, education, disability benefits. In the military, we're too proud to claim anything because we want to re-enlist and stay, and nobody wants to be known as a slacker or sick bay commando.
Right.
Now that you're out, you need to file for those disabilities. You need to find out which ones you can file for, and you need to see either the County Veteran Service Office, or you need to see the VA or the DAV or somebody who can help you.
Preferably, and I'm not knocking the VA, but you want to use a service organization, whether it's the county or the DAV or one of the other service organizations, but find a representative to do your claim.
Exactly. Now, the VA will not do, the VA is a government agency. They're tax paid.
Right.
If you ask them a question, they will give you an answer.
Right.
But you may not know what to ask.
Right.
You go to a service.
And they're not going to give you any more sometimes either.
Well, right, and they may not know, depending on what they do in the VA, they may not know, where someone like you or in my old job would know, okay, this is what we need to ask, this is what you need to be able to produce for the VA in order to get a claim.
Yeah, the VA's got a lot of great people that work for it. It's got a lot of good policy and bad policy, but it is a red tape, government agency, and that's not taking anything away from the people that work there. I think they're great people, but, it's got a lot of problems.
It is the second largest executive bureaucracy after the Department of Defense. So even, we heard about Shinseki and now Bob McDonald. You can have the best person in the world leading that organization.
It's huge.
They're so entrenched in the bureaucracy that there's so many levels it has to get through. The individual VA employee wants to do the right thing, but there's so much middle management that sometimes...
And that's what the DAV reps and that's what the county reps try to do, is finger through all that red tape and make it a little bit easier, and hopefully the outcome's a little bit better for you. So.
Right. You can do your own package, or you can have somebody do it for you. I would not pay nothing against attorneys, but I would not pay for something that's available free.
There's
and
no
like I
reason to pay.
said, an attorney, unless they specialize in this, like Social Security disability or workman's comp disability, they may be great at that, but the VA claim is a whole different animal.
Right.
And so go see someone who will do it for free. You don't have to join the DAV. You don't have to join the VFW. I mean, they'll help you do the claim.
Right.
I'd like for you to join the DAV, and please consider joining the DAV. We could use the numbers.
I tell everybody, and I talk about the organizations all the time. I say, join this one. I said, join one of them, because they all do something for veterans. So join one of them at the local level. And if you don't have time to commit at the local level, join one of them, because the lobbying that they do in Washington for veterans is huge. And the more members, the more voice they have. So we got to close up. And I always ask everybody that comes on the show, if you had to do it all over again, would you do it any different? Would you still join the Marine Corps?
I would still join the Marine Corps. I'm happy with my career. I was a lucky son of a gun. I mean, some friends didn't make it.
Right.
But, I'm unique.
And you're a great guy. Dave, thanks for coming on the show, man.
Thanks, Ed.
We'll see you next month.